What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Crimson Tide Today. I'm Zack Aitken, and I appreciate you joining me for another episode as we talk all things Alabama football. If you're enjoying the content, one of the best ways to support the channel is by hitting the like button, subscribing if you haven't already, and sharing the video with another Alabama fan. And be sure to leave a comment below. I always enjoy hearing your opinions and discussing the biggest stories surrounding the Crimson Tide. For more Alabama football coverage throughout the week, including recruiting news, team updates, and instant reactions, be sure to follow me on X and Instagram at ZAiken7. So we've got a lot to get into today, so get comfortable and let's start the opening drive. So, one of Alabama's newest commitments in the 2027 recruiting class, it may not be getting as much national attention as some of the big time 5-star prospects, but don't be surprised if that changes over the next year. I want to deep dive into wide receiver Cedric Simmons today. The Selma, Alabama native, he recently flipped his commitment from Auburn over to Alabama, and that gives Kalen DeBoer and wide receivers coach Derek Nix another explosive playmaker in the Crimson Tide's 2027 recruiting class. And after hearing his high school coach talk about him, it's easy to understand why Alabama made him such a priority. As a junior, Simmons put together one of the most impressive seasons you'll find anywhere in the country. He caught 106 passes for 2,192 yards and had 20 touchdowns. That's not a typo. He had more than 2,100 receiving yards in a single season. In fact, he became the first player in Alabama high school football history to eclipse the 2,000-yard receiving mark in one season. Let's look at some highlights from Simmons' junior year. So here we see Simmons here put in motion. And this is a great play here. There's going to be 4 guys going after the ball. Keep in mind, he's 5'9", and somehow he comes down with the ball. That's very impressive. This is going to be a little tunnel screen here. Get the ball out. Simmons makes a guy miss. Another miss. Puts his foot in the ground. Gets north. Takes it to the house. Here he is at the top of the screen here. ISO 1-on-1. Coming down with a jump ball. I love how he's able to high point the ball at such a smaller frame for a receiver. This is the top of the screen here. Beats the corner. Grabs the ball, and he's going to take this one to the house, making a couple of broken tackles. So Simmons' coaches, they describe him as a dynamic playmaker who can make an impact on the game from anywhere on the field. Whether it's catching the deep ball, creating yards after catch, or making defenders miss in the open field, which we all saw in those highlights, Simmons, he consistently has shown the ability to turn routine plays into explosive gains. That's why Alabama believes he's a player who's going to be making a lot of plays at the next level. What stands out to me is that he's going to be a good fit in Alabama's offense. We've seen Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb build offenses around receivers who can create separation and make things happen once the ball is in their hands. Simmons, he checks all of those boxes. He's listed at around 5'9" and about 190 pounds, but that gives him a strong, compact build that allows him to make plays with his strength while still maintaining the quickness needed to create the big plays. And Alabama, they didn't just stumble upon his recruitment. The Crimson Tide offered Simmons after he was impressed at a camp in Tuscaloosa. And from that point forward, the coaching staff continued to prioritize him even after he initially committed to Auburn. Eventually, that persistence paid off when Simmons flipped from Alabama earlier this month. I also think it's worth mentioning that Simmons, he grew up an Alabama fan. By his own admission, Alabama football was a huge part of his childhood, and that opportunity to play for the Crimson Tide was something that he had been dreaming about for years. When Alabama pushed hard late in the process, it became difficult for him to pass up on this opportunity. Now, recruiting rankings, they are important, but we see every year players outperforming their rankings. I mean, last year, look at Lazier Brooks, and that just paints that picture. When you look at Simmons' production, his explosiveness, and the confidence Alabama's coaching staff has in him, it's not hard to envision his ranking climbing over the next year. The bottom line is this. Alabama landed one of the more productive wide receivers in the state, flipped him away from Auburn, and added another in-state playmaker to a recruiting class that continues to build momentum. And if his high school coach is right, Cedric Simmons is far from a finished product, and he's going to be making some headlines at the collegiate level. One of the biggest priorities for Alabama's coaching staff right now is building relationships with elite players in the 2028 recruiting class. And that's based off recent comments from one of the nation's top athletes, and it looks like the Crimson Tide are doing exactly that. Today, we're going to talk about 4-star athlete Cameon Compton Nero. And if you haven't heard his name yet, it's going to be one you're going to want to remember. Compton Nero, he's currently ranked as one of the top athletes in the entire 2028 class, and he's the number 2 athlete by multiple recruiting services. Alabama offered him back in May, and since then, the relationship between the Crimson Tide and the Oklahoma standout appears to be growing very quickly. In fact, Alabama may have been positioning themselves as one of the schools to beat. Compton Nero, he recently returned to Tuscaloosa for a camp visit, and it sounds like he walked away very impressed. One thing that stood out to him was the culture he observed while on campus. He talked about seeing how Alabama players work and how they continue to push themselves regardless of the conditions. That's something we've heard about from recruits mentioning about the Alabama program for years. Whether it was under Nick Saban or now Kalen DeBoer, one of Alabama's biggest selling points has always been the standard of work that they expect inside of the program. According to Compton Nero, he got to see that firsthand. Another major factor here is Alabama defensive backs coach Jason Jones. Jones has become Compton Nero's primary recruiter, and the two have developed a strong relationship over the past several months. The recruits said that they communicate every week and sometimes even more frequently than that. And honestly, that's not surprising. When you're recruiting a player with this kind of talent, relationship building becomes just as important as facilities, championships, NIL, or NFL development. The good news for Alabama is that Compton Nero appears to genuinely enjoy talking with Jones and likes the way that he coaches. Even while injured during the visit, he spent time watching Jones work with the players and came away impressed with his coaching style and his attention to detail. Now, let's talk about the player himself. The numbers are absolutely ridiculous. Last season, Compton Nero, he accounted for more than 3,300 total yards of offense and had 49 touchdowns. And that's only half of the story. On defense, he added 95 tackles and had 5 interceptions. I mean, we're talking about video game numbers here. But what's more impressive is his versatility. He's played quarterback, wide receiver, safety, and several other positions throughout his high school career. This season at Owasso High School, he'll primarily be playing wide receiver and safety while still getting opportunities with special packages at quarterback. But here's the interesting part. Alabama's not recruiting him as an athlete. They're recruiting him as a safety. The coaching staff believe that his ball skills, tackling ability, coverage instincts, and overall versatility, it makes him an ideal fit in the secondary. According to Compton Nero, Alabama likes the fact that he can play free safety, strong safety, cover the slot, or even move over outside to cornerback if needed. In today's college football, that type of flexibility is incredibly valuable. Defenses are going to constantly start looking for players that can do multiple things, that they don't have to have substitutions. Compton Nero, he fits that description perfectly. And the good news for Alabama fans is that the Crimson Tide seem to be in a very strong position moving forward. Compton Nero said he'll release a top 12 very soon, and he was very clear that Alabama is going to be included. He specifically pointed to the consistent communication from the coaching staff and the effort they put into recruiting him. That's always a good sign. But there is a long way to go in his recruitment. He does have visits planned to several major programs, including Oklahoma, LSU, Ole Miss, SMU, and Texas Tech. But if you're Alabama, this is exactly where you want to be. You've identified one of the best athletes in the country, built a strong relationship, gotten him back on campus, and you positioned yourself as one of the top contenders. The next big date to watch will be September 26th when Compton Nero returns to Tuscaloosa for Alabama's home game against South Carolina. So we're going to keep an eye on Compton Nero, but I think this guy, he can make some big-time plays in the crimson and white. It feels like no matter what Kalen DeBoer does right now, somebody's going to be questioning whether he's the right man for the Alabama job. Over the last few weeks, we've heard criticism from national media personalities and questions about whether Alabama is still among the college football elite. And plenty of discussion about it has been whether the Crimson Tide can get back to winning championships under Kalen DeBoer. And honestly, DeBoer seems perfectly fine with all of this. During SEC Media Days, DeBoer was asked about whether Alabama was flying under the radar heading into the 2026 season. His response, it was very simple. We got to go prove it. And that's it. No excuses. No complaints about media coverage. No arguing about preseason rankings. Just a straightforward acknowledgement that Alabama's got work to do. And if we're being honest, this is probably the right approach. Think about where Alabama is right now. The Crimson Tide are entering another season with a new starting quarterback. There are new faces throughout the roster. Several key contributors from last year's team, they've moved on. And despite making the college football playoff in 2025, there are still people questioning whether Alabama is truly among the sports elites programs. DeBoer, he understands why those questions exist. I mean, he basically admitted it. At SEC Media Days, he talked about how every team has to prove itself, regardless of what happened the year before. He emphasized committing to the process, matching actions with goals, and earning success on the field instead of just talking about it. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because that's exactly how Nick Saban built Alabama's dynasty. Not by talking about championships every single day, not worrying about where his team was ranked in July, but by focusing on preparation, execution, and improvement. DeBoer's message, it sounded very similar. And honestly, I think that's the one reason some of the criticism, it feels a little overblown. I haven't been shy with not letting y'all forget about what this 2025 team accomplished last year. Alabama went 10-2 in the regular season, and the Tide, they went into Athens and they beat Georgia and ended its home 33 game home winning streak. They ended up reaching the SEC championship game, and they became the first team in college football playoff history to win a road playoff game. And their season ultimately ended against the eventual national champions. Was it a perfect season? Absolutely not. But it wasn't this disaster that some people are trying to make it out to be. The reality is that DeBoer inherited one of the most difficult jobs in all of sports, not just college football. Replacing Nick Saban, it was never going to be easy. Nobody was going to replicate what Saban accomplished. In today's era of NIL and the transfer portal, many fans and analysts believe that that level of dominance year after year, it may not ever happen again. So where does Alabama go from here? According to DeBoer, it's very simple. You got to prove it. Prove Alabama belongs in the championship conversation. Prove the program can continue competing at the highest level. Prove the doubters wrong. And the good news for Alabama fans is that none of these questions are going to get answered in July. They're going to get answered on Saturdays in the fall. The season's getting closer. Fall camp is right around the corner, and before long, we'll be starting to find out exactly what kind of Alabama team that we're going to be seeing in 2026. So, one of the more interesting Alabama stories coming out of college football recently, it didn't involve a current Crimson Tide player. Instead, it involved arguably the best wide receiver in college football. Ohio State superstar Jeremiah Smith, he recently revealed that growing up, Alabama was actually his dream school. But according to Smith, things didn't work out because Alabama wasn't recruiting him the way he was expected. Now, if you're an Alabama fan, that comment probably just made you stop and think for a second. I mean, we're talking about Jeremiah Smith here. He's a player that's considered by one of the best prospects in the country coming out of high school, and he's already developed into one of the biggest stars in college football. So naturally, the question becomes, how did Alabama miss out on a player like that? And honestly, I think there's a few things worth discussing. First, let's start with Smith's actual comment. He said that Alabama was his dream school growing up when Nick Saban was the head coach. He loved watching the Crimson Tide and envisioned himself playing in Tuscaloosa. But according to Smith, Alabama wasn't recruiting him the way schools like Ohio State were. Eventually, he signed with the Buckeyes, and obviously the rest is history. But this is where things get interesting. A lot of fans immediately hear, they didn't recruit me, and assume Alabama completely ignored him. That's probably not what happened. In today's recruiting world, recruiting often means much more than simply offering a scholarship or making contact. It means building relationships, making a prospect feel like a top priority, and in some cases, competing aggressively in the NIL landscape. Many fans and analysts have pointed out that Alabama didn't have contact with Smith during his recruitment, but Ohio State ultimately made him a much bigger priority. And sometimes that's just how recruiting works. I mean, even Nick Saban missed out on elite players. People forget that Alabama didn't land every five-star recruit during the dynasty years. The Tide, they missed on quarterbacks, receivers, defensive linemen, and future NFL stars in general. The difference is Alabama recruited at such a high level for so long that those misses rarely hurt the program. But what's fascinating is that Smith admitted that Alabama was the school he dreamed about attending. So let's think about that for a second. One of the biggest stars in college football, he grew up wanting to wear the crimson and white. That's just a reminder of just how powerful the Alabama brand is and how powerful it was during the Saban era. Every player hundreds of miles away grew up watching Alabama compete for national championships, and they wanted to be a part of it. The other thing that this story highlights is just how much recruiting has changed. Today's recruiting landscape, it's completely different than what it was 5 years ago. Relationships matter, playing time matters, development matters, and NIL matters. And sometimes schools simply have to decide that they're not going to engage with certain recruiting battles if the asking price becomes too high. Alabama staff has openly discussed walking away from recruitments when they feel the situation no longer makes sense for the program. Looking back, would Alabama have loved to have Jeremiah Smith on the roster today? Absolutely. Every program in America would. But that's recruiting. Sometimes you land Ryan Williams. Sometimes you land Cedarian Morgan. But the good news for Alabama fans is the Crimson Tide have continued to recruit at an elite level under Kalen DeBoer, and the program isn't lacking for talent at the wide receiver position. So it's hard not to wonder what could have been. I mean, imagine Jeremiah Smith catching passes at Saban Field and Bryant-Denny Stadium. I mean, that's a pretty fun what-if scenario for Alabama fans. But I'm not gonna lie. Smith said that Alabama was his favorite school when Nick Saban was coaching. Smith probably never would have played for Saban since he retired before Smith's freshman year, and he ended up signing with that safety school for players that leave Alabama. That's also named The Ohio State University. Also, I think it's worth noting that Alabama was actively recruiting in-state superstar prospects like Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman, and Perry Thompson. Those guys were all in the same recruiting class as Jeremiah Smith. So guys, that's going to do it for today's show. Now I want to hear from you. What was your take on today's topics? What topic points do you want covered? Let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading your thoughts and continuing the conversation with y'all. If you guys enjoyed today's video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update as we get closer to kickoff and another exciting season of Alabama football. For more Crimson Tide coverage throughout the year, including recruiting news, team updates, and breaking developments, be sure to follow me on X and Instagram at ZAitken7. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate your support, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Until then, roll Tide.